Yeah, the crawler wild's always bringing me home. Crawler wild's always bringing me home. Crawler wild's always bringing me home.
Hello, wild ones, and welcome to another episode of the Find Your Wild podcast. I'm so excited to have David Ian Howe here from Ethnocynology. Did I say that correctly?
Yeah, Sinology, however you want.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
I'm so excited to have you here today. For people that don't know you, if you want to just give like a brief background into what you do.
Yeah, I'm an anthropologist, I'd say first and foremost, and then in anthropology I studied archaeology, which is understanding human behavior through time with material culture, and specifically I studied hunter-gatherer, stone tools, and ecology. And in doing that, I got really fascinated in how humans interacted with wolves and early dogs, and then it kind of just took off from there because no one had really, focused fully on that as a subject yet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like I always saw articles in the past, and then I saw your work, and I was like, wow, this is very interesting. I feel like I was always fascinated by that. So I'm excited that you started that
Yeah.
subject or started focusing on that subject, which is pretty cool. What got you started initially into like history in general?
Yeah. Well, we just talked about being from Long Island in the beginning.
Yes.
I grew up there where it's pretty multicultural and like I heard Italian every day growing up, Spanish every day, English. And then I moved to Tennessee when I was in high school, and everyone's last name went from like Giovanna and Iannacone to Smith. And that cultural shift was really, I realized I was lacking something. And when I went to school for history, ended up taking an anthropology 101 class, and I said like, oh, this is what I like. I like cultures. And specifically, I really was interested in how it's called the Columbian Exchange when Europeans came to the Americas and the mass exchange of like, plants and animals across the world and stuff and technologies. And yeah, I just got really stoked on that and then learned about stone tools and then got more stoked on that. And here I am. I hope that answers the question. I'm kind of digressing.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We have to have a little bit of spark into our interests, right? So
Yeah.
that makes sense. That's really cool. I saw the video you uploaded the other day. You like kind of make stone tools too.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
What kind of, I was interested in like what kind of, are there specific stones that you have to use that you're able to flake off like that?
Yeah, so there are, it's called stones with like silicus or silicious, anything with silica in it. So
Mm.
millions and millions of years of sediment being compressed in the ocean with little pieces of plankton and other organic matter makes the stone brittle in a way, and it fractures in the same physical sense as glass does. So flint napping is the process of making stone tools. There's my dog, by the way.
Oh,
And
hi, buddy.
he'll pop in.
Yeah.
But when like a rock hits your windshield and it starts to crack and fragment, flint napping is you're just controlling those cracks to peel off to the shape you want of a stone tool like I got right here.
So cool.
Yeah.
I love that because that's actually one of
Oh,
my
cool.
I have a clothing brand, so I like I'm very interested by that. So I love, it's so fascinating to me too, like how you even make it. So I guess that makes sense because like it has to be soft enough to be able to break to make it sharp.
Yeah, and it fractures and sounds just like glass when it breaks, and obsidian is still like the sharpest material on Earth too, like next to glass. But one thing I would like always love to express about stone tools is it's very difficult. It's kind of like chess in your head because you have to think a couple steps ahead. You have to understand physics and listen to the sounds of it and stuff. So it really gives you an appreciation for how, for like 3 million years we were making stone tools, but when they got really, intensified in the Paleolithic and into, especially with Native Americans, have some of the most beautiful stone tool technology on the planet. Really gives you an appreciation for how much work and craftsmanship goes into that, but also for deep in the past, how much brain capacity they certainly had. Yeah.
Right. Like I've heard you talk about like, some people have the misconception that ancient people were just running around naked bopping mammoths, right? That's not the case at all. They're very intelligent.
Yeah, like we dug a mammoth site a couple years ago where there was a dead mammoth and then a village built around it to process all the hides. And like you would think the tusk was really cool, which was, but we found a ivory bone needle or just ivory, and it like someone kind of pointed out when I posted about it. You wouldn't think about something so tiny being so significant to daily life back then because they had to sit there sewing those hides or they'd freeze to death. So just a tiny little thing. Yeah.
Yeah, that's so fascinating and so cool. And just the technology that they invented that relates back to us now, and how we still obviously use technology, but to the utmost extreme now,
Right.
yeah, is really fascinating and cool. And I think I heard you say that, obviously people back then were not like cavemen, like stupid, like as sometimes people say, but like they probably could have passed. Like, didn't you say they could have passed like tests now? Like,
Yeah, like a standardized test. It
yeah,
depends on. I guess you listened to my dog lecture.
I
Uh, yeah,
did.
thanks. Um, it depends on who you ask because paleoanthropology gets it can get kind of heated. Like there could be a reality show about like conferences of it, but pretty much yeah, like 50,000 years ago onward, people were exactly as we are now, just limited by their environment. Um, and so the people that were painting, the cave in France and Spain and all that would have, they could have passed the SAT or had, a high IQ.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
so cool. Yeah, and it like goes to show too that I love also like the uncovering of history and like the more that we can find out about like I guess like how we relate to them because they're still so similar to us but so different in so many ways, which is pretty cool.
Yeah.
Um I love that topic. So, I want to change also a little bit and talk to you about dogs because
Of
obviously
course.
that is your field of passion. And just to give, I guess, a little background about like what made you like want to get into specifically like dogs.
Yeah. My aunt had a vet practice on Long Island as a kid. Well, worked at a bunch. Now she has her own practice in
Oh,
Islandia,
cool.
I think.
Oh, cool.
Um, but always had a stream of dogs in our house. Like we would watch some when she would always want to take some home. We'd have some, and then I had our own dogs, and then just loved dogs. But when I got into archaeology, I kind of noticed that I went to school at University of Tennessee, Knoxville, and in all of the paintings in the museum of the different periods of Native American history, there was always a dog painted in the background. And the professor pointed out that like the artist always made sure of that because dogs are so intrinsic to Indigenous American society. And then that got me wondering like how old are dogs? And I had a professor show us like a video on that. And we read a book about it and just like it's funny that people just have always assumed dogs have been there, so there wasn't too much intense research into it.
Hmm.
But only recently with genetics has there been a lot more advancement because then you can really get an idea. Because otherwise, you're just kind of digging holes looking for dog bones, and you're not gonna find them. Yeah,
Right. Yeah. I love that like there's more availability for information too with like the more technology is getting better for us in the future that we can be able to understand the past so much better too.
hmm
Um and with dogs in I had a good question or interesting question for
sure.
you. Um when so like did dogs were they domesticated in one spot and then brought over, or did multiple different cultures domesticate dogs separately?
This is a topic of debate, but I would say that the current research suggests it was mostly done in a concentrated area in East Asia, up in like Siberia,
Okay.
and from there they were spread like as a technology across Europe and into the Americas. Um, yeah, but there, I don't doubt there was probably a couple people in France that fed some wolves some bones and something similar happened, but
Sure.
the oldest genetic evidence of dogs that we can trace back to like, the Adam and Eve of dogs comes from
Yeah.
Siberia. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, and that's also just based on like what evidence that you have, right? Because there could maybe eventually be more evidence that pops up, but we just don't know yet.
Yeah, there's only so many, you know, intact dog remains that we can find that we can say for sure are dogs, because I pointed that out in the lecture too. It's wolves and dogs are the same species, so when you find a really old dog, is it just a wolf? And like, how do you? And then there's arguments about that, and it's kind of fun. But,
Yeah.
yeah.
What's been your favorite like archaeological dog finding or that you find like super interesting?
Yeah. I guess no like specific sites that are great. That one in near the Sea of Galilee was really cool with the lady buried with the puppy.
Hmm.
But in terms of just something I found through research is like connecting dots that every culture has some kind of, dogs are in the creation myth, or they have to do with the afterlife, or they're like part of their religion in some way. And it's like with statues of Anubis, clearly the Aztecs had a dog god as well. Fenrir in Norse mythology, and then in indigenous American mythologies, which I don't want to lump them all into one group, but it is pretty common that dogs are just, part of the afterlife. And they help guide you through like the spirit lands and things like that.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
so interesting that like I remember you saying in your lecture that dogs are, especially in mythology, are mostly or a lot associated with death and guiding humans into death. Like you said, the lady being buried with the puppy.
Hmm.
Um, just goes to show how intrinsic our relationship with them is too.
Yeah, it's pretty like, I guess humbling would be the word. Like when, especially
Yeah.
to find a burial like that one with the Natufian lady. Like, yeah, it's pretty cool. And then a site in Germany as well, a 14,000-year-old burial with two humans and a dog. So,
Was that a
yeah.
newer find by any chance, or?
Not off the top of my head that I can remember.
I don't
But
remember. I feel like I thought there was like a newer one that they found, but um
probably
yeah.
it pops up all the time.
Yeah, I that's one of my favorite things too, especially about when I was listening to that. I'm a big mythology buff as well, and
Okay.
I love the connection like just between different cultures and like the similarities and how we can connect as well. And dogs are such a huge part of that, and um just how much we connect with them. And maybe you could also go into how how wolves, I guess, are so when we first when we were like in the ancient past, um how similar our hunting styles were, and I guess how you presented it in such a great way of how similar we are biologically as well.
Hmm. Yeah. The If I also go on tangents, just let me know and I can
Oh,
stop.
that's
But
great.
cool. The coolest thing I would say is that obviously chimpanzees and bonobos are the most related to us as a human species.
Right.
Um, and like you're more related to a chimpanzee than a dog is to a fox, which I always find pretty fascinating. Um, but in terms of sociality and in terms of just behavior and diet breath and prey breath, wolves and humans, especially in higher latitudes, have the same, hunting strategies, hunting styles. And there's like several researchers that kind of point out that like obviously being so in touch with the natural world back then and like that's all you had, you would probably notice, how wolves hunted certain animals, which ones other animals avoided because if they were poisonous or something. And you would watch wolves hunt and you could take like base your strategies off of that. But also because wolves are so social and they have clear language with, tail wagging, showing their teeth, rolling over, um, and they have like pretty interesting social systems in terms of like the alpha male thing is kind of only something that happens in captivity where it's like a very controlled suppressed environment, but in the wild it's just a constantly moving dynamic of like who's the pack leader and things like that. And it can be matriarchal, it can be patriarchal, And I just assume ancient people, and I say all this without having sat there and studied wolves with binoculars for years, but from what I've read, it seems to be like it would have made sense for humans to have just watched them and seen so much kinship with them. And dogs coming from East Asia, it's kind of interesting in Mongolian mythology. So like what Genghis Khan would have been, subscribed to was that like humans and wolves or humans and dogs are both descended from wolves. So it's like we're just that, connected in that sense. So that sociality led to humans and wolves interacting without too much fault.
So cool. Like the
Yeah.
ultimate symbiotic relationship too.
Yeah. Yeah, I would agree. And someone asked me on another podcast, like, do you think that was inevitable? And I had to think about it, and I'd say yeah, because they're
It's a good
so
question.
similar. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a girl a wildlife photographer from Yellowstone that I follow on Instagram. I think her name's Savannah, and she got this amazing picture actually of a coyote and a badger working together, and they flush out I guess like some sort of prey, but they're they don't do it all the time, but they're known to work together, I guess, symbiotically to help get each other food, which I guess is kind of cool with in our relationship to wolves and how we kind of work together too.
Yeah. Any of the like a badger and you said it was a coyote?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah. Any like animals in the order Carnivora, so like things with fangs and that hunt, are I guess pandas technically don't hunt, but they're still in the same order. But they're very social, and their brains are designed in a way to cooperate with others. Even if cats are pretty solo, they still like have that cognition and it's part of their adaptation. So it's just like, it doesn't surprise me that they would work together and stuff like that. And it's kind of cool that you can now with like trail cams and things like that catch those moments.
Yeah. We'll just
Yeah.
have to see if they domesticate each other.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, there's a theory that raccoons are, I can't remember the author, and I didn't finish the book because it was fascinating, but I got busy. That like you can look at raccoons and how they interact with human environments and like urban environments, and how close they're getting to people without being afraid of them is exactly what happened with wolves. But raccoons have hands, so it's a little more scary.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, raccoons would be very cool to be able to domesticate, but yeah, they're pretty agile with those hands, so
Yeah.
that would be definitely kind of scary. So,
I would agree.
yeah, yeah. And dogs were also the very first domesticated animal, like before anything, right?
By far. Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, that we know of, but it seems to be the case.
very cool.
Yeah.
Uh, I was gonna say also what when was like the first start of when we start to see actual like dog breeds?
Yeah. Everything from 20,000 years on to like 10,000 years, so that time period we were hunter gatherers, until we started farming, and like most of the world was still hunting and gathering for most of the time. But uh, the dog, according to researchers, would have looked mostly like in between a wolf and a dingo, just like a standard yellow coat, standard like brown looking village dog, and just a wolf that got smaller and dog shaped. And then from then, like in the Neolithic, where you have now people that have time to breed dogs, and you need dogs for hunting, and people are farming all day, you need them to protect the fields. Like I'd imagine that's when people were like, especially with trade, being like, these dogs are really good at detecting predators. These dogs are really good at herding the sheep. Like, and then like all that trade would have happened. And since dogs, in my opinion, are a technology, and also like another organism, it's just like it makes sense they would be traded and mass produced in that sense. Yeah.
Yeah, so kind of like the moment in time in the past when we started to kind of stay in one place, that was when it was more suited to try to start more specific breeds for different purposes, I guess, right?
Yeah, because with hunter-gatherer societies, you see more art and more, um, cultural material, in places like caves, obviously, because it preserves, but they would have been huddled in there when it was really cold. And, you make art when you can't go outside. But the more
Right.
mobile you are, the less art you leave behind because you don't
Mhm.
have time for it. So in the Neolithic, and not just to say art, but, other jobs and tasks and things like that would have been so diversifying it like rapidly. Yeah, including
Yeah,
dogs.
I love like your term that dogs are kind of like a biotechnology, especially when we get into certain dog breeds as well, like the Saluki and the Border Collie, and then going down further and further. Um,
Yeah. Yeah, like the NYPD is now using those robot dogs
oh
for
yeah,
just specific things, and obviously the army uses it too. But it's funny to me that we look at that as like technology's getting crazy with like a robotic dog, but also if you think about just how you can whistle and a border collie can then herd 100 sheep into a pen is like better than any computer or AI robot there exists now, and that's been around for 10,000 years. Um,
yeah.
so I find that so fascinating, but I am curious to see how you know like what are dogs going to look like in the future in that sense. Yeah.
Yeah, that is definitely going to be very interesting, and I feel like that's so cool too to think about, like dogs intuition and what they're built for and what they're made for too, and the different uses like to guard or to protect or to hunt. There's so many different dog breeds. When I grew up, I was definitely one of those nerds. I would carry around a huge dog breed book.
Yeah,
So yeah.
I think my
So
brother had that too.
yeah, it was like a big gray book, and I would just like take it everywhere with me. So, like, I'm
Cool.
very good with dog breeds, but I've clearly always found that very fascinating too.
Yeah.
Um, but it's also funny too. It's like I also wanted to ask you, like you said too, that wolves are not like, clearly there was a separation, and we're not 100% sure, or I guess there is still a debate about whether the gray wolf now is the direct descendant of the dog or whether it could have been another one. We're not sure about that.
That is, I keep saying that's debated. That's just how science goes. Uh,
Yeah.
but from my understanding, like, there's multiple studies that say it could be, you know, the descendant of modern gray wolves, and the gray wolves just kind of did their own thing still, and they're the same thing. It could be an extinct gray wolf species that dogs are, descended from, and those are gone, and the current gray wolves are different, you know, that aren't related. But then it could also be that modern gray wolves and the wolves we have now, or the dogs we have now, share a common ancestor. Uh, but either way, when I explain evolution to people, and this works really well with understanding dogs too, it's like when America was colonized, you had British people, and they moved here, and then it became America. So there's like English speaking people here that became America in 2010. And then there's British people that became, what Britain is in 2000, or sorry, it's 2024 now, not
Yeah.
2010. um, uh, we're still, related in that sense. We share a similar language, but we're very different cultures. Um, and I would say wolves and dogs is kind of like that. Like you can still, obviously, you can interbreed with British people, but you can still mutually understand your language. It's a very similar culture, and you're still related in that sense culturally. But in terms of dogs and wolves, they can still interbreed. They can communicate and they can interbreed in the same sense, and that's like kind of how speciation works.
Very cool.
Yeah,
Yeah. Because
yeah,
I remember you talking about, like, it's not the same thing to go out and get a wolf. Like, you have to keep training them. Dogs have been domesticated over hundreds of thousands of years to be by our sides, right? Or like to be technology to us. And wolves kind of have stayed in their own path. It's not like you could go out today and just like domesticate a wolf, right? So,
to my understanding, yeah, I've
yeah.
would love to interact with one, but it seems to be the case from what
Yeah.
I've been told.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Have you heard also, or about, like, I guess, I don't know, I heard something on the internet about how, I mean, I don't know how they would know that a woman specifically did, but they said that women had a huge part in domesticating dogs, or did dogs at least like stay at the house or like or the cave, I guess?
Yeah, this is one of the more fascinating things about anthropology to me, especially with like modern politics. It's like when the French, the Spanish, and the English got, especially here to the Americas, and documented, how the indigenous communities existed. You can look at it with the critique of, they had their European Christian lens and probably just didn't care to write about the women maybe and just wrote about the men.
Right.
Or they wrote about all of it, and that is accurate, that, the women do all this work and things like that. But something um, that I've always noticed that like seems to be pretty unanimous and like it aligns with indigenous oral histories and things is that women do, at least in Native American societies, like it's like a sacred thing that they do raise the dogs and take care of them. Um, so I find that cool, and in a lot of like their creation stories and like mythologies and like gods and deities and things like that, they have like the gods have pet dogs a lot of the times, or it's just like there.
Yeah,
Um, yeah.
that is very
So
cool.
yeah. I hope I stated that correctly, but yeah, it's just like it's hard to understand if like everything they wrote down was like actually correct in a lot of their ways, but yeah, it's that one. That one seems to be like factual.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, right, because you can like look over a bunch of different sources to kind of verify, or at least like put them together to see what I guess that's the hard part too about, history, right? And looking back at history is having unreliable sources to base things off of as well.
Yeah. Especially back then. And something I learned about too is like since the English, the Spanish, and the French were all, and I guess the Portuguese and Dutch too, were all competing, you know, capitalistically in terms of business for, colonizing. Like they would make propaganda against the Spanish and make them seem terrible or like, yada. So even reading those sources, you're like, well, of biased sources, this one's even more biased. So which one do I read? Yeah.
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 And you have to like go and pick through and like try to go past people's opinions in order to get to the fact within the writing, which you're sometimes there's not any physical evidence, so you only have oral evidence or written evidence of what you have in front of you. So I can imagine how hard that could be too.
Yeah, very much so. And a colleague of mine is Pawnee, and he does like radiocarbon dating statistics to kind of understand and correlate that with oral traditions of the Pawnee Nation and things like that. And it seems to correlate for the most part with what was written down by explorers and things. So
Oh, that's
uh,
very cool.
it's cool. Archaeology can figure out a lot.
Yeah. I love
Yeah.
that. I think that's so cool. And I guess also I remember you talking about was that there's a specific law when you're doing archaeology in the United States to protect like indigenous sites, but you can learn a lot through the dogs, right?
Yes. So I guess to put this into perspective, since like you have the old world, Europe, Africa, Asia, and then like the land bridge from Alaska to Russia.
Hmm.
Um, like the bottleneck of Native American population, there's debates as to how they got here. People think, the usual one was the land bridge. Other people think it could be, boats and things like that. But genetically, it seems to be Northeast Asia. Everyone filed into the Americas, and then it got cut off. So indigenous Americans can then pretty much trace their genetics all the way back to that initial, you can say colonizing or peopling migration of North America and South America. And because of that, any remains found in the United States, there might be other laws in other countries, but the U.S. is, where I work. It's called the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act. And any grave found or any human remains or even like what's called objects of cultural patrimony, so just like a pipe or like a carved bone or something like that that was with the burial, um, belongs to the tribes. And what we have to do is then, if you find any remains alive or dead, or recently dead or very old, you call the coroner, and then the coroner will come, and then the tribes come and basically can decide amongst themselves who gets to claim ownership, but they all still share kinship with the remains. Um, and in that sense, we can't really study the human remains or test the bones and see what they, have to say. But you can get a glimpse of human diet through the dogs that you can find of what they were eating and consuming, because that still, remains in their bones too. And a lot of dogs around the world today, but also for all of history, just eat human feces. Um,
Fun.
and really fun. Yeah. So even if they weren't directly eating like food off of our plates, they're eating what humans were excreting. That
Right.
it's gross, but it's all just the same chemicals that we're looking for. Yeah.
Right.
That was a
Yeah.
long-winded answer, but yeah.
No, that's good. Yeah. Gross, but knowledgeable at the same time. And I guess kind of good because, it makes sense to at least like respect the, like indigenous like part of the burials as well. And then at least I feel like we could still learn from the past and not disturb that other portion of the site as well.
Right. And it's debated. There was a big court case in the 90s about like it's called the Kennewick Man. There's a very old remains. He had like a spearhead in his hip, and just like as a very old intact one that could tell us so much about the history of Native Americans here. Um, and it went to trial, and the tribes ended up winning, and it was like a landmark case of like uh, you know, even if it's that old, they still have the ownership. But another thing that I often ask my students too is like, even though we can get this information from dogs too, if dogs, I keep preaching like how close they are to people and we're burying them and things like that. If the dogs are buried carefully in a neat grave by Native Americans, should they be classified under that law as well?
Mm.
And some tribes will argue, no, it's not too often that you find a like perfectly made intentional burial of dogs. So luckily that argument doesn't come up too much, but it is something to think about. Yeah.
Yeah, that is a good thing to think about because we are so connected to dogs, and we have such a close connection that we're even. I think I heard something that we could like read each other's facial expressions too. Like we've grown to read each other as well, which is pretty fascinating and cool.
Yeah.
So
And that's another thing that comes in like wolf social behavior is just eye contact and your dog, I think it's called whale eyes when they look to the side and like it means they're uncomfortable with you and stuff like that. Like dogs even have eye movement things that we can pick up on and things like that. And
yeah, I feel
yeah.
like I watched a video and there was like a very interesting study about how I guess like people like they ask them to oh what does this dog mean right now like they're barking, oh that bark means that it's angry, like we can just pick up their emotions like that, you know.
Yeah, like I know my dog barks to an extent. Like I know it's his happy, I want attention bark, and then he has his like there is a coyote in the backyard bark, and like it's
Yeah.
very distinct.
Yes.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. um yeah, I have two dogs. I have a 100-pound Newfoundland named Claire.
Wow. Okay.
And I have a mini Australian Shepherd. He's sleeping right here. I call him my shadow because he's always following me everywhere.
Good.
But I always say that he specifically has like a sixth sense for reading my emotions. Like if I'm like sad or something, like even and then dogs in turn also read our emotions and like he knows exactly what I'm feeling or like he'll come up to me and comfort me. Um I mean, it's just so cool that dogs kind of really were made to kind of be our best friends, you know?
Yeah, like biologically and chemically and just how they're I mean, essentially programmed. Like DNA is just programming. So it's
Yeah.
kind of it's cool. My
Yeah.
dog's not so much of a when he wants to be, he's like kind of my shadow, but he's a German Shepherd and Elk Hound mix.
Oh,
So he's
cool.
like a hunting dog, but I don't hunt with him. So he's just
Yeah.
like constantly like, well, I need something to do. And how would I phrase it? He's just very like he won't let me pet him if he doesn't want to be pet. But when he wants to be pet, it's like the only thing that matters in that moment, and I can't do anything else. And he just has such a distinct personality and like intelligence that I've never experienced in like my previous dogs, which were labs and beagles and things. So, and I've heard people with German shepherds say it, and I always thought it was kind of an elitist thing to be like, well, shepherds are different, but they very much are. It is like my dog is a domestic wolf more so than my lab was, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's incredible how much more intelligent I feel like my mini Australian Shepherd is than my
Aussies are
Newfoundland.
brilliant. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's like incredible. I like kind of joke all the time that he can like think, like know what I'm thinking, like, or read what I'm saying, or like, understand exactly what I'm saying. And I love my dog Claire. She's very sweet. I just kind of, I like, she's kind of a doofus
Yeah.
sometimes.
Yeah.
But in the best way possible. Like, she's so mushy. Like, she'll literally come into bed and like my husband and I are on either side and she'll just fit herself
Yeah.
right in between us.
I miss that. Yeah. My
Yeah.
dog won't, he like refuses to sleep on the bed with me. He'll do it if I'm not there, but
Oh,
dogs sleeping in bed with you is like one of the like more interesting things about, dog domestication. Like they
yeah.
literally sleep in bed with you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's so funny. And like I think there was also a study that people like sleep better when you're sleeping with a dog. And I feel like that just makes sense with, talking about the domestication of dogs and them being used as like a tool and like protection and stuff, that we would just be able to sleep better. I know I do, at least.
Yeah. I've heard that a lot recently on the internet. I've not read the study, but I wouldn't doubt that at all. And I know sleeping with like fire is like a lot better for you, or comfortable, or some kind of small light like that. And yeah, I think it's the dog's breathing is what it is, and just knowing that that's in the room with you is like it calms your heart rate and stuff, and you sleep better.
Yeah, I
From
feel
what I
like
heard.
there's some instinctual part inside of you that's like, oh, God forbid anything happens in the middle of the night. Like they have better hearing than us. They have better senses than us. They'll be able to pick it up before, before I would. So even though I'm a
Yeah,
light sleeper.
yeah.
Yeah.
And if my dog is like, he's at my parents' house for like the week or something when I'm on vacation or something, and or sometimes like you're still at home for a few days before you can go get your dog from somewhere. Those few days where I don't have my dog in my house, it's very weird because like you're not scared of sleeping, but you're like, oh, there is nothing to bark or warn if someone comes in the house or something. Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely feel like uneasy. Like I remember when I first moved into my house and I was just like organizing, but my dog was still at my other place. And I just remember being in the house. I'm like, this feels very weird. I've always grown up with a dog in the house or a dog nearby. So when you're
Yeah.
so used to that, it is definitely weird, you know?
Yeah. And I remember when we lost our dog when I was in high school. It was like a
Oh,
weird thing that she's an old beagle. Like all the times where you'd be at your desk, like working, or like I guess I was playing video games in high school, and she comes up and like, dogs put their snout to like up your arm or your leg to stop what
yeah.
you're doing. Like, it's like weird that I assume when you lose any like a human, it's the same thing, but like the phantom dog wasn't there like messing with my arm when I was playing, and I found that interesting as a kid. Um,
Yeah.
Not to get like bummered to talk
No,
about
that's
something fun.
okay. I know
Yeah,
it's always so hard to lose our animals too. And I feel like for the longest time, um I couldn't talk about like my childhood dog without coming to tears, which I think is
yeah.
just such a part of like how like they're our best friends. I had a black lab growing up named Kelly, and she actually taught me how to walk, and I'd hold on to her fur and she'd just walk really, really slowly. So
That's
I've
cool.
always had that connection. And then we always had English Mastiffs after that growing up. So I've always had
Wow,
huge dogs. Yeah.
that's cool.
Yeah. We had one dog named Elsa who we kind of rescued from a pet store, Shake a Paw. I don't know if you ever heard of that, but
Mm-mm.
yeah, unfortunately they didn't take very good care of their dogs, but we kind of had her, and she was like the runt, so she was kind of smaller. And then we went to a breeder who was trying to bring back the English Mastiff to what they were, I guess, in the medieval period, so
Hmm.
like huge. And she was so tall. I'm like 5'4", and she was past my hip, like just on her fours. So
Yeah,
she was really, really tall, almost
like a
like Great
big
Dane
dog.
tall, which is
Huh.
crazy. Yeah.
It's crazy how like the variations in sizes of dogs is truly wild. And
Yeah.
like technically a Great Dane could impregnate a Chihuahua, but obviously that poor Chihuahua would probably implode.
Oh my
But like
God.
the fact that that's like can happen is just bizarre to me. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
It's crazy that right, it's not, and it's cool because like it's not like they're all still connected, like they're all still able to do that. It's not like when a horse and a donkey get together and they make a mule, and then that becomes like not fertile anymore. It's like
yeah.
there's still that connection there. Yeah.
And it's the same with wolves, coyotes, and dogs, like because they're all the same genus, and
Yeah.
like I would kind of argue the same species at the same time, because species is just such a it's a spectrum really. But yeah, they can all interbreed without making mules and things like that, and just interesting. Yeah,
Yeah. That's very cool. I guess to just kind of change like a little bit of topics, but
yeah.
is there like a particular like site or anything that like I guess you would dream of going to be able to like study more, or if you had one?
Yeah, so the site that we've worked on for a few years here in Wyoming is the Laprelle Mammoth site, and that's the one with the mammoth that was hunted. And well, I'm not sure if it was hunted or they just like it was stuck in the river and they kind of dispatched it or something, because that also seems to be the case that they do. Either way, a large complex of what we'd call houses or like huts built around the mammoth, where they were, making stone scrapers to tan the hides and peel the hides. And there's a lot of it's called red ochre, which is like what they make the
Mhm.
handprints out of and stuff, all over the site, which they mined from a site that's a 2 hour drive away. So that would have been like a
Wow.
2 week walk away, and they got that from this. So obviously, this thing meant a lot to them for some either medicinal or maybe it has a functional purpose. We don't know yet. But at a site like that, uh, to step back, there's no evidence of dogs in the Americas earlier than 10,000 years. And there's a dog burial in Illinois that's 10,000 years old. But with the initial Ice Age hunters that came to the Americas, there's no evidence of dogs yet. So at a site like that, I would like to see those initial mammoth hunters that came here, or like large bison hunters that are now extinct, evidence of dogs. And in a lot of what's called ethnoarchaeology, it's like I had a professor that went and lived in Mongolia with reindeer herders to kind of understand how people in cold climates that live in tents migrate and how they occupy space. They have dogs, and what he noticed was the dogs when they come into camp, they're always screamed at or kicked or like get out, and like they eat people's poop in the woods and stuff, and they chew bones way off of site. So it is interesting that when we dig a site like that in Wyoming, where all the human activity and the stone tool, it's so cool because you can see the fire pits and then where they're making the stone tools around the fire. Uh, there's no dog bones there or dog burials, either that they just didn't exist or they were because there's a big rotting mammoth carcass right there. They're screaming at them to go away or they tie them up or something. Um,
Mhm.
so you'd have to dig just random shovel tests half a mile away from site to find any evidence of dogs. But to answer your question, my dream site would be like a mammoth and a human like just gored on the tusk would be kind of cool. But
That
um,
would be really cool.
really cool. But
Yeah.
yeah, any evidence of early mammoth hunters in the Americas with dogs to confirm that they were doing that, because that happened in Europe and Asia. So
Okay, cool.
um,
Yeah, so we haven't really seen that as much, it like ancient wise past just 10,000, you're saying. Um
in the Americas,
in
yeah,
the Americas, right? Yeah. No, that would be very cool. I That sounds so cool, that site too. Like just
yeah.
I can't imagine what it's like to be able to actually like dig it up and be there and kind of get the first piece of like, oh wow, this is what ancient life was like. That's so cool.
Yeah, and I've been sitting on the footage for 2 years because I'm just not sure how I want to make it good, and like I'm trying to figure out the difference with like prehistoric archaeology is you're just looking at dirt and like tiny pieces of stone and like stains in the ground. But to me, that's like a fire. That's people making tools. I can tell what time of year it was. Um, But when you have like, Rome or like ancient China, you can clearly get a picture of what this looked like. But I'm hoping with like VR or AR or whatever we have in the future, like whatever Pokemon Go is, I think that's AR.
Okay.
Um, you can put like your phone up to the site and see all those like tents and the dead mammoth and things like that to understand it better, because that's really the only way to show it. Um, because basically all my footage is just like people picking little rocks out of the ground, which to Nat
Right.
Geo doesn't make a great, story.
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
yeah,
That would be really cool though, like you said, to be able to like have your phone and then like see how it was. That would visually be kind of, I could see how that would visually be like the best way to be able to, oh, recognize like that's how they did
yeah,
that and everything like that. I feel like ancient history too for me is so fascinating, because like my podcast is called Find Your Wild, and
hmm
I think that ancient connection to the wild and like our connection to dogs is so ancient, and I love that connection, and I think like finding that today is kind of how we can like find our own wild, if you so will.
yeah.
um I really love that.
I agree. And I often say, like, people ask me, I don't know what the question is that they ask me, but this is the answer I give. I'm trying to think of how to get to it. Um, like, if you grew up in Hong Kong and you live in like a high rise and have a tiny little Shih Tzu or something, or a Pomeranian, or if you're like me on Long Island, I had a beagle and a lab, or if you're me out here in Wyoming, you have a big hunting dog, and I can go hiking with him in the wilderness and stuff like that. I Me and that person in Hong Kong and me out here in the woods still have that like connection to the Ice Age past that we had in the form of like a domestic wolf. So something that used to be dangerous, that used to be like, on our level in terms of like survival, and in terms of respect, is now like still there. So we don't have to live in huts, we don't have to live in caves anymore. We have all this like amenities of modern life, but everyone still gets to interact with like if you live in an inorganic environment like a high rise in Hong Kong, you still have that organic thing that's connects us to the past, like that finds your wild,
Right.
I guess,
Yeah.
if you want the clip.
The phrase, right? Thanks
Yeah,
for that. Yeah, no, it is. It's so true. And I think like that's kind of why I started this too, is like that there's so many different ways that we can do that like, and I also think of finding your wild as finding like your true inner self as well. And I think that I personally think connecting to nature is kind of a part of how we find our own wild, because we're still animals. We're still connected to
right.
animals, like even as modern as we are. I feel like studies show like being in nature is really good for our mental health, and I think that
Absolutely.
just is a really telltale sign of like bringing our pasts, kind of like connecting it to our modern selves, and how we can have better mental health and better connections, and uh, being more of ourselves.
Yeah, no, I think that's really well put. Do I have time to explain something too, or do you have
Oh
to
yeah,
wrap
please
up?
keep. Yeah,
Cool.
yeah.
I got all day, by the way.
Oh yeah, yeah. Me too. My mom's watching my kid. I'm good.
Perfect.
Yeah.
It to piggyback off what you just said, like something I find so cool is like if you do grow up in Rome and you're around Rome and you speak Italian and like all that, and like you're connected to that culture, you can see the ruins, like you get how it works. You're a little more connected to that ancient society. But here, like I'm not related to the Native Americans that lived here, but hunter gatherers are hunter gatherers. Like humans operate the same way. They have to, eat uh, to get energy and then reproduce. That's just like we're all animals. So at the very basis of archaeology, like you can go from there. Like that's the bare minimum, and then you can extrapolate more about their culture from that. And this is how I was trained. And when I'm out here in the woods, like there was one time recently, I've done like survival stuff where I've just went out in the woods without like my phone and stuff like that for like a couple of days. And I've done one where it was like with no tent and camping, doing that myself. But I'm digressing. One time I was there with my car and it was really cold and I didn't have a lighter and it was all the wood was wet, so I couldn't like make one. And I was just like sitting there freaking out, being like, I'm gonna have to drive home because it's so cold out here. And I had to like scramble in the car to find like a emergency lighter flint thing in like my car kit, and like how long it took me to make that fire and stuff like that is like one of the closest I've came to like, oh my God, like this is how people die in the woods. But I mean, I had my car. All that
Right.
to say, with that, and when I'm out there in the woods and like moose terrify me more than bears, because bears will like leave you, moose will charge you. Uh, just
Yeah.
how when I don't have my dog and I hear a stick crack and stuff like that, how my ear perks up and things. And but when I do have my dog, how not as scared as I am because he can smell things or hear it before I see it, and I can see things before he smells it sometimes. Um, all that to say, it makes me way more connected with the people that I study in terms of like, they had to sew those hides. They were probably cold that day too. And we're like, we got to get this done. And like, had to go get the specific flint to make fire and all that stuff. So that was a tangent, but
No, that
uh,
I love that actually.
yeah.
That makes perfect sense too. I love that that helps you relate back to what you're studying too. It makes so much sense, the connection there. And yeah, I feel like also people don't take into account how scary ungulates are. They'll just
Yes.
stomp the shit out of you.
Yeah. Especially moose. They're just so big. And then there's a page called Torons of Yellowstone. I don't know
I
if you've
follow
heard of
that
that.
page too, yeah.
Okay. And just like how many people will walk up to an elk and it's like it's the size of a car. What are you doing?
Like, yeah,
Yeah.
it's yeah, natural selection didn't take those people out, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. But it gives you appreciation for it and like I've not seen a bear. I've heard a bear like camping at night and it just sounds like a big panting dog. Um and from people that I know like study bears, they say it's just a big dog that's like kind of wild.
Yeah.
Um but yeah, just where was I going with that? Yeah, just being in nature and connected to it, and like I just to come into a continent that's not populated by any other like primate species before you got there must have been crazy. Um, oh,
Hey, sorry, we're having technical difficulties. But while I have you here, this episode is sponsored by my clothing brand Femme Sauvage. So be sure to check out the link in the description for some awesome designs, including things like this, Our Lady of Wild Beasts, and many other amazing collections. So feel free to check it out in the description below. Thanks for tuning in and dealing with my troubled internet connection, and we'll be back to the episode. Thank you, and thanks for watching.
I went to the like, washed up, but uh,
Um, yeah,
I don't remember where we were at.
I
But
don't remember either. But I guess while I still have you,
yeah,
another question that I had is my husband and I were talking last night, and I guess one of the it was about raw food, about
hmm
feeding dogs raw food. And someone commented under this post that my husband saw and was like, dogs don't eat that. They're not related to wolves. They're just dogs. And people were
yeah,
like, that's not true.
yeah. There's a lot of that. Uh, Wild theories or like wild ideas about it. Like I don't know where they get it, and stuff. And anytime I'm in, that's why I don't talk about like dog food or dog training because it just brings out
Yeah.
like you think political discourse is bad on Twitter or like Instagram. Like talk about dog training and it gets bad. But
Yeah, there's so many
yeah,
different varieties, and people like hold their guns with what
yeah.
they are.
Or
Yeah,
just having a collar on my dog like upset somebody one time and it's like that's abusive in like this sense and I was like well I think 90% of the world disagrees with you so
that's crazy. Yeah.
just push it aside.
Well, to be honest, I feel like then that person's dog is naked because they don't have a collar on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway I could go on about that all day but
Yeah, that's so funny too, because like with I feel like I have a horse too, and
oh cool.
I feel like the horse community is kind of like that too. We're very, very nitpicky about,
I bet
yeah, about everything.
you have a horse in Huntington.
Yeah, well, he doesn't live with like in my
Oh,
backyard or anything like that. I
gotcha.
have him in Brentwood, so
Okay.
I have to like drive a little bit to get to him, but he's kind of like an older guy now, so I just go and kind of groom and hang out with him. I don't ride as much as I used to, but um
Yeah,
yeah.
I love horses. Yeah.
Yeah. What else what else I was going to ask you too was that you said that mammoths and people and dogs, they were all around at the same time, right?
Yes.
But is there any, I guess there's no evidence of them, like like you said, like there's no evidence of like hunt sites, I guess, with dogs, or
Uh, I remember like in my head right now. I remember I'm like it's saying yes because like I'm pulling up that file. Uh, because I remember looking for it and finding an example of a site where there was dead mammoths and dogs,
Mm,
but I can't for the life of me remember, and I don't know if it was like too common, but at the very least, they existed at the same time. Like mammoths only went extinct like 10,000 years ago, and dogs have been around for 20, if not more. So it's
yeah.
been a thing.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. So if they ever cloned mammoths, a million things I'd like to study about them, but how they like react to seeing a dog would be interesting to me. But
Oh, that'd be so
um,
cool. That'd be so cool
yeah,
in two ways, right? Is to like because I guess like the way that they have to bring them back, like they have to use elephants. So like I don't know if elephants have that, but like there's African wild dogs, and then like do they have a disconnect still from that ancient past with dogs, or like is that going to be so innate, like still in their DNA that they're going to have that reaction to them too? That's
that's the stuff. Yeah, I would love to know because they're technically breeding an Asian elephant with a quarter mammoth and then like multiple generations until you get a full mammoth. So it's
right.
still like an Asian elephant in a sense. But
Yeah.
yeah, but just to see how like they do move in herds or something like that would be kind
Right.
of
Oh
cool
my
to
God.
see.
That I can't wait for
Yeah,
that. I feel like that's going to be really fascinating. And I love that whole concept of how that's going to help like they say it's going to help with global warming or with the climate and
yeah.
bringing them back to the like the tundra like just would be so cool.
That's one of those things I don't know exactly how that helps, but I'm like, sure. Like if it helps, let's do it.
Yeah, like I'm
um,
definitely obviously not knowledgeable. I just like that through
sure.
passing like remember what people are saying in that regard, but
I imagine that's something to do with the vegetation and like keeping the yeah.
yeah, I think like from what I remember correctly, I think it had something to do with the fact that there's almost too much grass and the way that they step on it and like knock down trees. I think something along those lines as
That checks
to
out.
breaking up, I guess, like the carbon or whatever. I probably
Yeah,
butchered that because I'm not an expert, but that's okay.
because that's a problem with horses here too, which is I mean you probably are familiar, but archaeologically, horses went extinct. Well, they evolved in the Americas and they left and went to Asia. As did camels. Went extinct here when humans got here, or at least around the same time. And then they got reintroduced by the Spanish during the Pueblo Revolt. They all went into the Southwest and started breeding. But since horses are endemic and evolved here, they're really good at the environment. They do well here. But horses apparently pull the whole root out of the ground
Mm,
when they eat something, whereas cows and bison just eat the top of it.
mm,
Um, so like the issue with the horse thing is like, and I might be butchering this, but uh, essentially wild horses being in out here on BLM land and open land out here, it makes it bad for cattle grazing because horses eat all the vegetation, and I guess in that sense, which would be more natural, but there's also not a lot of bison running around the plains anymore either. So
yeah,
it's just interesting. Yeah.
it's really hard. So I've had so I actually like with my clothing brand, I have a horse design which is based off of my actual horse, and then I try to
Okay.
donate $5 of like each design that's on the animal to a specific charity. So for the horse, I'm actually like donating to Rewilding America Now, and I remember
Cool.
reposting something about that, and a friend messaged me and was like, like, oh, I really love that, but then there's also it's a pretty big divide as to in people with wild horses as to whether I guess they should be here or whether they shouldn't be here. Um, but I guess we can all agree on, like, I don't feel like the method of how they're dealing with them and sending them off to get, like, you know, is not great either. Like, I personally
Yeah.
don't agree with that. Um, like, to find, I guess, like a happy medium in between, because it's also so hard on all these charities that are just trying to like go out there and save them um and take care of them too. But it's definitely a very interesting topic that I feel like obviously I'm not the most knowledgeable about, but um, for horses to have left and come back, but they're kind of perfect with how they like live here, like they know how to live here because they were here,
Yeah.
is very interesting too.
Super interesting to me. I don't know too much about the industry and all that stuff of it right now, but I just it at least fascinates me.
Yeah.
Um, my friend Will Taylor, he's a professor at CU Boulder, just wrote a book called Hoofbeats.
Mm.
And it's about like the history and the domestication of the horse. So that might be right up your alley.
Oh, that's
Um,
cool. I'll
yeah,
definitely have to pick that up. Yeah,
yeah,
love that.
cool.
Are
Have
there
to
any other like
hawk someone's
yeah. Are
book.
there any other like book like, I know I'm putting you on the spot, but any other book recommendations for people that you have?
uh, the book that got me just like really hooked on like when I was in grad school doing dog research, that kind of answered a lot of my questions. It's called The History of Dogs in the Early Americas.
Mm.
And that was like a really like it's a short book. It's not like a huge thing, but it just goes into the different regions and how there's different mythologies and how they use dogs different ways. And then anything by Alexandra Horowitz, I think is her name. She's always like a New York Times bestseller book. You see it at the airport. It's like dogs and then like some other heading, but she's great.
Cool.
Um, yeah,
Yeah, those all sound very interesting. I'm always looking to add books to my to be read list. I just need more time, obviously, but
yeah.
um, yeah, those sound super interesting too. I love that.
And people ask me like, "Have you read this?" And my usual answer is like, "I haven't read a book since Chronicles of Narnia, so don't ask me." But I try.
Yeah.
They just end up on the shelf.
I also wanted to ask you, so I guess people get also confused with dire wolves being actual wolves because that's obviously in their name, but they're
Mhm.
not, right?
Um, they're not. This was like found out a few years ago thanks to genetics because their skeleton looks just like a wolf, just like bigger and more robust. And it seems dire wolves were more adapted to hunting in the lowlands and like hunting like on the plains, bison and things like that, and had the jaw strength to do that. But they went extinct during the climate shift and the end of the ice age because wolves and coyotes were more adaptable to higher altitudes and like prey up there, um, which is interesting in itself. But yeah, running genetic tests on dire wolves, they were like, oh, it's an extinct breed of or extinct species of dog that existed in the Americas a long time ago, and it was the last one that was remaining. So they couldn't have been bred with dogs or wolves, but they were their own thing that just kind of looked. It's that convergent evolution, which is kind of cool.
Right. Yeah, that's what I was
Yeah,
gonna say. I don't know. I didn't know the term for that, but that they kind of evolved at, like, in a similar niche that gets filled, right?
yeah, and the same in Australia. There's no, and that's a whole political but also interesting scientific debate too. Is the Tasmanian tiger, which technically should just be Tasmanian wolf. It's the same.
Mhm.
It's just tiger because of the stripes.
Right.
But a marsupial evolved in their skeleton looks exactly like a wolf. It's crazy when you look at them face to face or side to side. And they, it's interesting too because Australia has no endemic ungulates, so it's just all kangaroos. And they had in their ice age had giant kangaroos, which is kind of crazy. And like other large marsupial, like giant wombats and stuff, would have been crazy. But when the dingo got there, about people have been in Australia up to like 60, 50,000 years. But the dingo only got there technically genetically 10,000 years ago, theoretically. And then the earliest remains are like 3,000 years old. But
Wow.
long story short, dingoes being domestic dogs that went, rewilded, because they just had a whole continent of like things to hunt very
Right.
efficiently. And Australia's animals were not used to that because they only had the thylacine, which was tiny.
Mm.
So it's really cool. So
Yeah, I love
obviously,
that.
yeah, yeah, it's really cool. It's something I wish I could study more. It's just like I only have so much time in the day. But Australia is
Yeah.
just as fascinating as the Americas. Yeah,
Yeah, only one person, right? So
right.
yeah. Um yeah, I feel like other lands and I always find that so interesting too. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Um so I feel like maybe we should probably wrap up here, but do you want to like tell people how they can find you and what other I know you have podcasts as well.
I was gonna ask, how did you get into this, if you don't mind me asking?
Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah. So, yeah, because I'm not in a rush either.
Okay.
But basically, so I started with my clothing brand first.
Okay.
And my clothing brand name is Femme Sauvage, which means wild woman in French.
Cool.
And I kind of always related to that because my dad would sing Wild Thing to me when I was younger because of my big, as you can tell, my big crazy hair. Um, so after I had my son, I kind of needed something for myself,
Hmm.
and the book actually I have it right there, "Women Who Run with the Wolves" by Dr. Clarissa Pinicola Estes,
Okay.
was a big inspiration to my first drawing, which was a woman who's running with the wolf, and just relating to that, and then that kind of started from there, and I kind of feel like the artwork that I got was like kind of like went through me. And then I'm a very deep person and I feel like it's very hard for me to also come up with like content, and I also feel like just talking with people is more of like my natural like ease. Like I'm always very interested in talking to people and hearing people's stories. So this was like starting this podcast path was actually just a more genuine way for me to connect with people other than just being like, oh, buy my clothes, buy this. You're,
Right.
because like there's so much more deeper meaning behind like my designs or behind that, and also just like people like you or like connecting with people like you. So like that's how that kind of came together as well.
Awesome. I love that.
Thanks. Yeah,
Yeah.
I appreciate that. Yeah.
Um, yeah, cool. Thanks for having me. And to answer your question, would be my YouTube or my Instagram is my main thing. That's Ethnocynology, but you can also find it looking up my name. And then I have two podcasts, which are the David Ian Howe Show is like a 2 hour like extended interview with people I find interesting, usually to do with anthropology and science. And then Ethnocynology is just my like basically my YouTube channel but podcast form, just topics I find interesting and I like, have a team that helps me write stuff and it's fun. Yeah, I'm not selling it very well, but those are my those are my two
Well, I
podcasts.
also
Yeah.
like, yeah, if I also can add, like, I love that you have this like comedic twist to how you tell the story. It's really drawing in. It's because sometimes when you're listening to like history documentaries or whatever, it could be like I
And
find
then the
I zone out
pharaoh
and I have
went
to like
down the yeah.
rewind or I have to like go
Yeah.
back. But I have to say when I was listening to like your lecture and everything, I was like hooked right away. And then I saw like kind of like the redo you did, and then like Charles Darwin, that was really funny.
Oh,
the,
thanks. Like when I had
the
the
ghost
costume.
of Darwin.
Yeah. Yeah. I One plan I want to do is like do a podcast interview with like Ghost Darwin, which would be kind of fun. I just gotta
Oh,
like
I love that idea.
figure that out. Yeah.
Yeah.
But thank you. That's the Long Island in me for sure.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
that sass and the funniness is inbred in us. And
Yeah.
I don't know if you also have a mouth like a sailor, but that's definitely uh
I've been tame on here, but yes.
yeah. Yeah, I feel like
Yeah.
people are much nicer out there. I actually
Yeah.
just came back from North Carolina. I went and visited my friend who's a wildlife photographer and
Cool.
biologist and guide in Alligator River. And we saw a bunch of bears. I got to see the endangered red wolves from a very, very far distance,
Cool.
but just to see them, because there's only 16 of them left in the wild, was unbelievable.
That's
and
wild.
I was
Cool.
out for like a day, and I went back in the morning, and I mean, the animals that we saw was crazy. I mean, we saw a black bear that walked right in front of our car. And we saw another one like swimming, because it's like kind of swampy over there, like in the water. I almost stepped on a cottonmouth, which was cool.
Fun.
Fun. We saw bobcats, vultures, like just so many, because I also love birds too.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was, I don't know even know where I was going with that, but that was also pretty cool.
No, yeah, I get it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just seeing all that stuff is great and
Yeah.
eye-opening.
Yeah. So yeah, hoping to do more like in like kind of like how you go like in the wild to do like like archaeology like kind of stuff, or like make stone tools. Like that's kind of like my next hopefully segment and everything. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Well,
it was
let
so
me know
nice
if
to get to know you too. Let me know if you're ever back on the island. That'd be great.
I will be. My aunt's pestering me to come home for Thanksgiving, but I can't make it this year. But when I do make it back, I will let you know, because I
Yeah,
need a black
that'd
and
be
white
cool.
cookie.
Yeah.
But
We'll bond
anyway, yeah.
over our Long Islandness.
Yeah, for sure. Appreciate you having me, and keep in touch for sure. I really
Yeah,
enjoyed this.
absolutely. And thank you so much for taking the time to come out and to do this. This was a really fascinating conversation, and I appreciate getting to know you more. Thank you.
Same to you. There you go. Yeah.
All right. And thank you so much, everybody, for watching. And we'll catch you on the next one.